Bye.
Welcome to Speak Sex. I'm your host, Eurydice, and today we're going to talk history. And my guest is an amazing author. She writes nonfiction, and she's recently writing specifically about American history. Her name is Elizabeth Mitchell. I may call her Biz. So Biz has written nonfiction books on politics, sports, history. She's written Liberty's Torch, The Great Adventure of how to build, the Statue of Liberty. And she's written The Fearless Mrs. Goodwin. And she came out recently in October with her latest book, Lincoln's Lie, a true Civil War caper through fake news, Wall Street, and the White House. So we're going to talk about it because, at least judging from the title, it's very timely. We are deep in this kind of like search of enlightenment of the moment in culture through language and gender and, gender consciousness. So welcome to the podcast, please.
I couldn't be happier to be here. This is great.
Yeah. I know Biz from a long time ago because she was my editor at Spin magazine when I was on the staff, like an investigative writer, and then she became the executive editor of George magazine, and then tragedy hit.
Yeah.
But so. Since then, we've both become mothers, and I'm looking at this title of your book, this long, juicy title, because we also live in historically potent times, right? And so I feel that pretty directly there is a parallel or a correlation, that is implied in your book between then and now, a time of civil war, which, some people have been afraid might happen again and off. And in the 19th century and now, which is, the 21st century. So we should be really far from that world of rumor has it and, fake news and conspiracy. But we're not at all. We are very much, living in a world where no one quite, knows what is true, and that is fed by the internet, right? So if anything, social media, which was supposed to bring us all together and give us access to information, has exacerbated our lesser instincts, right? Of gossip. Yeah. Our current president, current for a couple more weeks, likes to compare himself to President Lincoln, which is one of the strangest things of the many things that he says to me, because I can see no similarity. Lincoln was a self-made man. First of all, he had a father who didn't believe in reading and books, and so he kind of had to go against that. And I know that he read the Iliad and the Psalms, every day during the war. He thought a lot, he was definitely determined to put an end to slavery no matter what the cost. And I think that he was aware, reading Homer, one knows that war is really for nothing, or at least that war, the war Homer chose was fought over nothing. Yeah. So, he knew, I think that he knew what he was undertaking, and it was a very biblical burden for him, the 500,000 dead and all the devastation. And he could have blockaded and boycotted the South, but he wanted to keep the Union intact. But I think that more than political reasons, he just felt that the abolition of slavery was an existential issue for America. If America was to be this new world, the American experiment, it could not have slavery. So, so and in fact, I think it was the Nebraska something Texas Act or one of those that would have expanded slavery to the new territories that made him run for president. So. Here we are. So, like, he kind of had a very clear idea of what America was to be historically. And he was willing to sacrifice his life and so many more, for it. And as far as I can see, we really have like the opposite kind of, I mean, if there are opposites, we have a president who doesn't have a sense of the American raison d'être. He just kind of understands the oratory a little bit. Yeah. So, but I'm curious, because of your title, do you see any similarities between the two men, or, in the way that they're dealt with, in America?
Well, it might not surprise you that when Trump is comparing himself to Lincoln, he's really talking about the fact that Lincoln got bad press and he got bad press too. So it's a purely it's an ego comparison, really. The interesting thing is that Lincoln got bad press for a few reasons. We start off with the just straight out racist, people going against him because of his stand about slavery. Then there were the categories of people, commentators, other elected officials who went after him thinking he was kind of a hick, he wasn't good enough for the White House. But there's a third category where actually there was a critique going on, and it links to Trump, which is that Lincoln also had some issues with the press in terms of freedom of press issues. He was, in my book, I talk about the time when this piece ran in the newspapers, and he was so outraged he sent the military into the newspaper offices and arrested the newspaper editors and put the military there for a number of days, shut down the telegraph, and all that. You see Trump filing these lawsuits against CNN and the Washington Post and the New York Times. He's trying, even the things that he was doing with postage, was trying to disrupt some of the, mailing, rights and things like that. And so some of it is based on the fact that Lincoln was a little tricky with some of our constitutional rights, such as freedom of speech. Also, right to a free, fair trial is his other. He tried to put an end to that while he was president. Suspend it while he was president.
And was there a justification for it, like war, or you think, having looked into it, that it wasn't justifying?
People there was some overreach there, because when the suspension of habeas corpus, the right to a free trial, was something that was people could understand if it had to do with bullets flying. You can't get to your court date because you're going to get killed on the way. So that would be the suspension of the right. And that was the way it had always been interpreted, going back to even England. But Lincoln expanded that to sort of be, the whole country on a certain level. And so that was really problematic. There were a lot of people fighting him who thought slavery should be abolished, but were worried about that particular issue. Yeah. So, there are. So, one of the things I'm trying to look at is not that, Lincoln's still an amazing human being. Like, the country needed that man, that courageous man who also could deal with so much pain. That it has to do with the kind of personality that's who understands that you might have to live through a tragedy to get the country where it has to go. But he also, there are things we could talk about in terms of, where he wasn't a perfect president. And I think that should be fine. Hopefully we haven't gotten to our perfect state yet. We still have more work to do.
Yeah. Plus, every politician lies. Yeah. So, what's the specific lie that interests you here?
Well, it starts out, Lincoln was a little bit more trickier with the press than you would expect. For example, back when he was a lawyer in Illinois, he would put fake stories into the newspapers they were under either a pseudonym, Rebecca, that he wrote a few pieces under, or anonymously. And so in one of them, he's actually going up against one of his rivals on this political issue, and he poses as Rebecca, writes this thing about what a philanderer the guy is, and then later on, the guy figures out it was Lincoln and challenges him to a duel. And Lincoln only got out of that because he chose broadswords as a weapon. And when the opponent saw him with his long arms, he just was like, okay, I'm out. The interesting thing is looking at some newer research since I wrote the book, I realized actually the guy that he went after was someone who was courting Mary Todd Lincoln. So it was also a sexual, kind of rivalry that he was acting on. But he, and then one of the strangest things he did was when going into the 1860 election, he bought a German language newspaper in the center of the country because he thought the German vote was going to be so big. And it was a secret contract. He drew it up, but the money was delivered by a friend of his. They could never reveal he owned it, and it had to support his Republican platform. So that's kind of more savvy and a little bit duplicitous than we think of when we think of Lincoln, right?
Yeah, for sure.
On the other hand,
both of those remind us a little bit of the tactics of the current president. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
I remember,
see how there is
they both
Trump maybe more.
Yeah. Trump totally used to call, page 6 or whatever, and
as
pretend
John
that
Barron.
he's not himself.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the stuff with Cohen, I mean, that's like a very similar story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a politics. I mean, to me, I think that there is no other way to run politics. It's like not a clean business. It's never going to be.
Yeah.
Even if they would, take money out of it a little bit, considering now it's worse than ever, flooded with special interests. I think that inevitably that's it's a mud floor. You gotta fight on it. Yeah. And there are lots of, candidates who won from both sides, from the Democratic Party as well, who won through like trickstery and, some sort of help, including like JFK. So with Mayor Daley.
You start to really understand as you're doing this kind of research. It is so important that everybody's involved because we all have to watch each other, right? So that you can never. I think it's unhealthy actually to have these situations where there's this heroic figure, that everyone says, well, that was the perfect president or what have you. I just don't think that's healthy because it's the democracy that's the cool thing.
Right,
the
exactly.
Thing that, everybody pitching in and putting in their different, values and skills and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. Like if we wanted figureheads, we could have stayed where we were with the kings and the,
exactly.
all the strong men. And the whole idea of the demos is the people. So the people is all and sundry, whether we're liked or not, regardless of what we what we believe in. And I do think that part of the challenge is this two-party situation which didn't exist back then, but now we do have it, the two-party monopoly, which makes it much harder for us, for the average, citizen to remember that there are other sides, to not demonize the so-called enemy. I mean, when there are two sides, inevitably you kind of focus on the other side as like the one you don't believe.
Exactly.
If we had like four parties, that would be diffused.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you'd be like, we get along with them. They're being crazy.
Right. I agree with this, but
it's like having a big family.
Right. Yeah. It would just be, I think, naturally a little more pluralistic. Let's talk about Mary, since speaking of them being humans. Mary reminds me a little bit of the Kitty Dukakis. But she also reminds me a little. I don't know. I don't know. I think about the current First Lady, And I think about Mary, and I wonder if we have made the progress that we women like to tout, like all of our feminist achievements and advances. And here we are. And, look at the First Lady. So, I'll say a couple of things that I know about her, but my ultimate question is going to be to you, again, like whether you see parallels and similarities or stark differences, between the two First Ladies. What Mary is kind of famous, I think, in general for, unfortunately, is that she was not quite, there was something off about Mary. And, I call it shopaholic. I don't know what she was. Maybe she was bipolar or maybe she was manic depressive. But her cure was actually a very, American, I think, her self-medication was a very American pathology, which I associate with the 20th century, with like late capitalism. So I think she is definitely a 20th century woman in 19th century America. And she was the second richest girl in Springfield. So she was already, kind of like a little entitled, we would call it now. She had already a big idea of herself. So when she was 12, she said that the man she would marry would be president, right? A pronouncement that like Lincoln himself didn't make about himself when he was 12.
Yeah, that's right.
It's
true.
And she definitely pushed him. And it's interesting, now I'm digressing, but I read that the love of his life was this woman, Anne Hutchinson, and she died of consumption. And he went into a deep, long depression and then came out, and I think, proposed to Mary partly for her fortune. Like he decided, okay, I'm going to do this career. I don't know. I'm just extrapolating because I read about the love story and the depression, and then pretty much after that, they get married, and Mary loved to spend money. So it was so when they moved to the White House, for example, she started the renovation, and like Congress, gave like 10,000 toward it, and she spent like 25 right away, and it was in the middle of the Civil War raging. And then so he sent her back to Springfield, but then she added a second story to the house. So she had to go back. Because, he died, he was like 40,000 in debt when he died, right after he was shot. She went on a dress buying shopping spree. So like that was a scandal. There was always a scandal. The time that she was not shopping and spending was when their two young boys died in the White House. And then she took to her bed and basically like went into, a period of isolation. Like she was clearly depressed, and he would get her like laudanum and morphine, all of which was legal at the time, So we have now a First Lady who is also, very much associated with her material, appearance, right? What she wears, the renovations. Like that's all we know, actually. We don't know much more. So it seems that not much, not much has changed. And if anything, like Mary was more of a willful, person, and maybe she was oppressed just by the gender limitations, of the era. So she acted out in, I don't know. But there is so much that in a sense, they have in common, and that's partly because the role like doesn't get updated, right? I don't know. So what's your opinion on all of this?
Well, I think she's a really interesting person, I think, as much as I think she was truly brilliant. I mean, when she was a young woman in Springfield, they didn't know what had hit that town. I mean, she was vivacious. She had opinions on everything. She was not at all a retiring type. And so apparently every male there was interested in her. And actually, as you go down the line, like I said about the other rival of Lincoln's. Stephen Douglas, the Lincoln-Douglas debates had been one of her suitors as well. So the historical archives are littered with her suitors. She was definitely someone who had probably some kind of instability that may have been manic depression or something of its ilk. He also, Lincoln, had some real instability. So it wasn't even just that he had the depression after his love died. He also was doing all kinds of things with Mary when they were courting, where he would hotly pursue her, and then as soon as he kind of had her, he would disappear, and he would tell her he had to leave her while like grappling all over her. They had a very physical relationship by all accounts, and so they would have these break up fights that would last for 6 months, and then they'd get back together again. And so all of that kind of passion, connection, destructive relationship went with them into the White House. And so you're right that one of the interesting things when I was looking at her problem with shopping, which is she was, what we call a shopaholic now, is that was an illness that only emerged right at that time, like in the middle of the 19th century. Because I was thinking about that, like what was its equivalent during, the Roman time or something, like could they be, you'd have to be like, Caligula or, one of the, Agallibus or something like that to be acquiring at that level. But she would go on buying binges with the idea that she didn't fit in enough in DC and she needed to somehow justify herself coming from the Midwest. But it also had a lot to do with her trying to be super attractive to him. And so she's always like buying these like really low cut dresses, and he would like comment on how hot she looked essentially. And but she was always very jealous of him, like the women who were around him. And so you feel this kind of torture that was her mental state, and then as you say, they lost one son when they were still in Springfield. And then when they were in the White House, they lost their 11-year-old son to typhoid in the middle of his presidential first term. I mean, it's just horrific. And at that point, he was so disturbed by the kind of catatonic depression she went into, he actually told her that she sort of needed to get herself together, or he would need to have her go to the sanitarium that was down the way in D.C., which, you can see either as being realistic because he had his own depression issues, and at one point, had been in a situation where his friend took him away for 3 months and took away all of his sharp objects around him and tried to help get him treatment. So maybe he was saying it in a sympathetic way, or maybe it's that kind of mild threat, but in any case, that was part of their relationship. So, yeah, the shopping in my book, the shopping is the thing that causes so many problems. It's this is a true story of what happened, and it was shocking what trouble she sort of put him in, and put the country at risk because of it.
We know more about them than we know about the current, couple in the White House, but we will find out. we will. I think there's a lot more that is going to be parallel as information.
I think so.
Leaks. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. One of the best accounts of the Lincoln's relationship came from this woman who had been a slave, down south, had bought her freedom by having side gigs sewing for people, and those people she was sewing for gave her loans to buy her freedom. She came up to D.C. She was so good as a seamstress tailor that she got the attention of Mary Todd Lincoln, who brought her into the White House. And then she became her closest confidant. And so that woman later on wrote a great book about everything she saw in the White House and these conversations she had with Mary. And that's how we know a whole lot about the intimate relationship of Mary and Abe. So I'm sure there will be someone.
That's a great detail. By the way, like that's 100% why I started embroidering to like honor these women, honor them, you know, like generations of women whose work was just like, you know, that's not fancy and valuable enough, you know, like the mothers, you know, taken for granted. And that's beautiful.
Well, she was and that was an interesting, you will appreciate that they had this relationship where Mary Todd would describe something to Elizabeth Keckley, you know, of what she dreamed for herself. And then this exquisite, you know, work would be produced.
Wow.
And then I find it interesting then that would be, you know, that would go into the Smithsonian or, you know, now it's museum work. But it's, you know, I mean, it's
because of
really
Mary's husband. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And of course, you know, Mary ended up, I think, in the sanatorium, right? I mean, I think her son eventually committed her for shopping. You couldn't afford it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just,
I know.
Yeah. I mean, I find the, you know, American woman's relationship with objects that have to do with our looks, you know, primary, like the most important factor in, you know, understanding, you know, what modern woman has become, you know, what our hard-earned freedom got us. And I don't mean just, you know, clothes or like jewelry, or, you know, which like in the old world, you know, women wore too, but also like all the work on the body and, you know, the cosmetic work and all that stuff. Again, because, you know, no matter what, our intellectual or our spiritual or our, you know, mothering work is not valued. You know, it's not valued as much. So, you know, no matter what we have changed and achieved, in the end, you know, we're valued by the male gaze, you know, that one glance that says, oh, you know, she's a trophy for a guy or whatever. Yeah.
I know. So, I'm finding it I think about these issues all the time, particularly now too, you know, things like the injections in your butt and things like that, like implants. I'm just like, it's fascinating like that a lot of the evolution just is into new ways of
objectifying
ourselves, for some other purpose of gaze.
Yeah. We're always like, it's always about the presentation instead of, you know, instead of what's there. In the process of always trying to, you know, catch up with the, you know, ideal presentation, we don't have time to spend uniting, you know, our parts, you know, and finding a voice that's not in the patriarchy, you know, finding a way to speak that's not typical of what we've known for 5,000 years.
Well, that's why even the Jill Biden, you know, controversy about her title is kind of interesting because, I mean, half of it is really she can't try to break out in a particular way. On the other hand, it also, you know, is in the kinds of structures of male society, right? That you get the title and that denotes that you have importance. But I just think it's a tricky thing. It's very hard to get to the winning, you know, to a place where you actually feel like it's an authentic expression of the woman's self and power and all the rest.
I do not practice identity politics. I'm very clear about that. You know, I don't judge people by anything but their actions and their policies. You know, I don't care what they, what ethnicity they are or what they're wearing or you know, what gender they identify with at a certain time. You know, to me, it's all of the same. You know, so. Personally, you know, I do wish that we wouldn't have to follow the same exact prescribed paths, you know, for men, because I don't see in the long run how that serves us, you know, since it eliminates our difference. and also it, you know, it leads us away from our actual like genetic biological power, which is the reproductive imperative, right? So that's like our thing. That's we can like that's our war. That's our rite of passage, And so in the process of only being recognized by doing things, that men do, we're giving up, a lot of our power. So I don't think it's a winning strategy in the long run. But in the short term, when you're trying to make, ends meet and get some respect and not be the wife of or the daughter of, like there are no other options. It's just her saying respect me for myself, and not for like the dude they married and supported in his career, right?
No, definitely. I mean, and I found that looking at the Mary Todd Lincoln path too. She was as educated as Abraham Lincoln was, and she had plenty of political opinions and very strong ones even from an early age. She was even as he was going into the White House, she had strong feelings about who should be running each department, getting the cabinet posts and things like that. And yet, because there was no clear path where she was ever going to be able to exercise her power, she ended up getting involved with all kinds of, charlatans and, anybody who would come through and flatter her, and, give some focus of attention, could kind of get whatever they wanted, whether it be a position in the, in some part of the administration or money or whatever it was. And so it was very interesting to watch this kind of like desperate effort that she had to try to make an impact, to mark her place in the world.
Yeah. And of course, in the end, I mean, I don't know so I would like to hear what you think. Again, as far as I've read, she was the one who wanted them to go see that play, My American Cousin or something. And he wanted to go to a ball of officers and their wives that was celebrating the armistice that had just happened like 5 days before or 6 days before. And she was like, you never do what we always do what you want to do. I don't know why where I know this from. And that's the power of like propaganda. I have a quote in my head somewhere. That she like led him to his, but the point is that's the normative, story that he, wanted to be with the officers, right? And instead went to the play, and apparently the night before, I think it was Good Friday, so the night before he had given a speech outside the White House, which they called the mansion then. So he used to go out and just speak, I think, to the people who would gather up. And he said that he was now looking forward to casting his vote next to black men. And that's, and Booth was there, heard that. And that was like, the tipping point where he had to kill him right away, even though they had been trying and conspiring. I mean, everybody, there were plenty of people trying to kill Lincoln at all times during the war. But apparently it was just that line that was just, abominable. So I have two questions. One is, is this true about Mary?
About
Mary
the
Contrary?
About the social thing? I actually don't. I have to say, I'm not sure I know. I mean, I do think when just even looking at that anecdote, what I see too is this is a fun couple, right? When it came down to a debate, do we go out dancing or do we go to a play? Like they were not like the Trumps who aren't going out socializing at all or having any.
Right.
Yeah. So it's that's sort of interesting to me. I found that they're interested in going to the theater. I mean, they were passionate theater attendees, that seems so intriguing, that they were very much caught up in the stories and apparently would discuss them endlessly afterwards. So they both had this kind of, deep interest in the storytelling and the narrative and and these deep performances. And one of the things that also was sort of strange when I was doing the research, because I was also working with very old newspapers, is to see how many times Abraham Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth were in proximity to each other in the newspaper pages. So even as Lincoln's going to the inaugural on this train ride, that's kind of this big press moment, right, adjacent in the adjacent column, you see that John Wilkes Booth fell on his sword and stabbed himself through the chest on the stage, and it's like just
Wow.
it's such a strange little anecdote.
Yeah, he was a famous actor.
Yeah, so there's this like interesting, parallel existence that's going on, leading up to it. And I mean, even, Edwin Booth was one of their favorite actors. I mean, the brother, he was very famous and, well regarded. And so, I mean, there was a lot of connection there. It wasn't just, it was like
Right.
having one of the bigger celebrities of the time
Right.
involved in that.
Yeah, I think Lincoln
there's-
saw
I-
one of the Booth brothers. I think the murderer, play Richard III, sometime
Yes.
before he got killed by him. Yeah.
And John Wilkes Booth did an amazing Hamlet, I guess, because I was reading the reporter who's one of the focuses of my book, wrote for many, many years after the incident that's in the book. And he did a whole thing on the great Hamlets of our time. And he said, despite the fact that John Wilkes Booth, I mean, it's very weird to include him. He's like, despite the fact that he assassinated the president, he was one of the greatest Hamlets that ever appeared. Yeah,
I don't know.
It's all very, there's a lot of like strange little complexities of the people that get washed out over time, so that you get this version that has no edges and all the rest. But when you get back into the nitty gritty of the story of who these people were, it's complex.
Yeah, that's the
interwoven.
beauty of being a historian and doing that research, that you can find the nuances and all the dimensions, because we are a combination of all kinds of like contradictions. That's what it is.
Yes.
Like, we contain all contradictions, as people and as a culture. Yeah.
But see, and I think that a lot of what you cover in your show has to do with the ideas of contradictions. Like, even the last one you did with the online dating, which should be, just an abundance of like flipping through people, and then you end up talking about the fact that it takes too much time to get to really know someone to the point where you're going to have this kind of real intimacy. And I think the similar things fascinate me when I'm doing this historical stuff, because I feel that when you actually when you can get down into those real details, you can accept the fact that, it doesn't have to be a fable. Like history doesn't have to be something where the moral's already set and you find the facts to go along with it. Instead, it can be like this real delving into what humanity has struggled with. And then, and where, liberate yourself a little bit from the idea that, that you have to have that one perfect icon. This particular story that I wrote about had like 50 different heroes pop up, and probably 30 people who did terrible things that you would never expect to have done terrible things. And so it's that thing that I think is where we can get real lessons on how to live. Yes.
We should all be historians. Let us all be historians. Forget feminists, historians. I think it's much more useful.
I mean, yeah, well, and also, not to be, like you said, too gender focused, but one of the reasons to be gender focused in history is quite literally, the thing that people complain about is true. Women got shut out of the stories for the most part. And, so now going back and having access to these records that we never had before, but we have through digitization, these are newspapers, for example, that never even were put on microfilm, but now you can get an actual digital record because of cool people like living upstate who just started scanning everything they could find.
Yeah.
But so you start to see who these women are. And that's why I was able to write about the first female detective in U.S. history who had a very different way about going about the detective craft, and so it's really interesting to see what she was able to do and, what she was fighting against at that particular time. And that whole area just seems like it's so untouched.
I know. I agree. Exactly. Yeah. There is so much work. So, please continue to do it. But and another thing, is that I feel that the language that we use and speak, like in Greek, it's logos, right? So the language, the logos is very much, formed by antitheses. We understand meaning by difference, right? Which I don't think is necessary. I think that's very much the way that the patriarchy has, made it work to kind of like, shrink us and define us in, in more and more limited categories. But there is a way which, in Greek is mythos, right? The more mythopoeic way of speaking, which is exactly that. It contains contradictions. It contains meaning that is, the multiplicity of meaning. And, you don't have to say, I don't want to be a she, I want to be a, zir, or, you don't have to, because you can be both, right? You can be everything.
Yeah.
Like that way of inclusion, of meaning, I think would help the culture so much, to open it up. And that's partly the work you're doing. And you can only do it like in the language that we all speak and share. But like knowing that there is a goal, there's a place. Yeah. Where language doesn't have to just be, good and bad, right? Short and tall. I mean, woman and man. The endless list of opposites. That's possible, and that is also a way to make meaning. And maybe the destruction of the normative language right now, thanks to fake news or real news or whatever, everybody, reality TV or reality TV, maybe that is our way into a language that has room for all the differences, at once.
Yeah.
At once.
Yeah. Well, because I think that, I've been thinking a lot about, because of my book, The Fake News and Fiction, fiction writing and all those sorts of things, and how, what is a lie and what are the motivations of a lie and things like that. And I started to recognize that there's certain topics that lend themselves to people delving into them over and over and over. And it's because there's something that's unequal, there is something that is not quite just. I think that if we could get away from the idea of things are all good or all bad and shift more into what are all the perspectives on this particular story, we would be getting somewhere much more true. Because the thing is, I just feel that the multiplicity of perspectives is what's going to get us closer to some sense of what is the reality, and that can, because right now we're debating all these issues.
Yeah, and that's America. Like America was founded for that, to allow every perspective to not have an authoritative, centralized, truth. Whether it's from the religious or government or institutional whatever centers. So that's what we have aspired to all along. But we keep getting sidetracked because it's of course it's easier. You get like faster headlines and
Yes.
the gratification is faster if if you go
Hmm.
by the kind of like obsolete way of understanding things, because then you're done. You're like, are they with
Yeah.
us or against us? Okay, done.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you're left more confused than you understand. Yeah, because
Hmm.
truth is right there, is in all the gray areas. So I feel that
Yes.
the more we read books like you and
Hmm.
yours, and the more we research, the stories of our idols or of our frenemies, or
Hmm. Hmm.
the more that we can place ourselves in the context of of humanity being ineffably flawed, and also ineffably beautiful.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I was thinking too of the fact that, you said the thing about, we don't seem to know how to handle this technology that we have right now, which is, the social media and all the rest that can circulate stories that are fake, and, trying to navigate your way through those, or just gossip or whatever else wants to be circulated. And it was really interesting to me when I was doing the research on this book to find that the telegraph was at the exact sort of same stage as we are now with our social media and internet. And as much as it was invented, 30 years before the date that I'm writing about, but at the time that I have focused this book, it had gotten out of hand. So when Lincoln first took office, he would send one telegram a month because he had to send a guy down to the telegraph office in D.C. to deliver it. By the time he's in office for 2 or 3 years, suddenly he's living at the telegraph office on the White House grounds, sending out messages all the time, reading everybody's messages. And then you had everybody in the cities who would exchange messages like we do now with text. Like they would say, no, let's not go to the opera. Let's go to to dinner instead tonight. And those messages would be exchanged all in one day within the city. So it was that level. But people have figured out how they're going to play tricks with it too. And so they're sending out fake information. People are realizing that they're more divided than they thought they were. So Samuel Morse, who invented the telegraph, thought it was going to bring the country together, but instead it showed how divided everyone was, that people don't think the same across the country, and suddenly it was causing problems. He set up a society for the unification of the country, like to build national unity, and it didn't work. So I think the thing is that some of these things too is that there's that old, like, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it, or what have you.
Yeah,
It's that,
yeah,
but it's
yeah.
also that
True.
our personalities, our human nature is the same.
Yes, yeah.
And so you could even imagine our ancestors being like, what, would you just look what we did? And you wouldn't be so shocked, and you'd have
Yeah.
a few tools, to fix these things. Because we've got to get away from this idea, like if we were wearing different clothing, we're somehow different entities. We're not. We're exactly the same with all the complexities. The Lincolns were having huge fights where they would not speak to each other, and then finally getting together, being crazy passionate again, and then like busting up again, like same as everybody else. And so I just think that
Yeah.
that's why I think it's worthy to take history out of this kind of dusty feeling, this dusty place, and or even revered place, and bring it back into like, what's the story, and and what did people actually do at the time, even the people who were living just what we would consider more basic lives, like, the guy running typing in the telegraph messages, what was he thinking? And that's what I was trying to do with this book.
Right. Yeah. Well, I wish that the big tech bros, all those masters of the universe, would read
Yeah.
more history and write less code.
Yeah.
They should just
Yeah.
force themselves to like take time off, but not to sell us, the secret to happiness, actually not to sell us anything. It's just kind of like, read like maybe 5 books a day, and see if they can incorporate that complexity into this, the internet, because it seems to me that right now it forces us in the other direction, where we just get, like SEO, where we get defined down by like our few words that you can Google.
Yes. I know. I was very excited one time. I looked at my Facebook, what they think I am for tagging for ads, and they had no idea what my political leanings were. Because I look at everybody's stuff, so they were just confused, and I loved that. I was like, if we can, if we can keep breaking up the algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. There is no other way. The algorithm will be broken. It's just a question of, as you said with history, it's a fad. It's just a question of when, whether you and I will be alive, I don't know. But by the 23rd century, all of these, will be done with.
No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, definitely. So, and, hopefully it will be done in a peaceful way and, lead to even more prosperity and all of that stuff. Yeah. I was going to ask you if you have like a thought about what's happening with the North versus South.
I know.
Dilemma, right? Like, to this day.
Yes.
If you see something changing, or is this how we're stuck?
I mean, the thing is, first of all, there's certainly some signs we're blending. I do worry, and maybe I want to think or write about this a little bit more, that people have gotten a little too loose with the idea that, let's muck around with some of these issues just to make political hay, just so that we can drum up enthusiasm for our party, and then we'll, carry some local elections or what have you. Or, but what people don't really understand is how delicate democracy is. Like, people really went and died for democracy, because it's such a weird thing to say, no, the people have to have the power and it will not be taken by only the, overlords. I think that, we probably need a whole lot more reminders of how weird it is for us to have gotten this system, however flawed it is still better to have the participation of the people. And so, and like, because you don't get it back easily. If it goes away, it's a long, dark period.
Exactly. And the danger here is that a lot of the people, well, like the Proud Boys, I mean, that's just a name that is going around these days. We could name them anything, but a lot of the armed, Americans believe that they're fighting for democracy. So that's the conundrum. That's the moment where we may start fighting against each other. Like Booth, Booth thought that he was saving the Constitution. He really thought not just that he was saving the South, but he, that Lincoln would destroy. So, we could go at each other, willing to like give our lives for the same, cause of democracy. And yet kind of like, not understand that, we stand on the same side because of this, because of the, monetization, I think, the extreme like capitalization of in politics. So, I see it here in the South, the constituency has changed a lot in 4 years.
Yes.
And a lot of the people who would have been firmly in the democratic, side, moved for all kinds of reasons, and they're completely like token reasons. They're like the sound of things, or like the performance, whatever. The machismo, or it doesn't matter, but. So they're not even about, again, they're not about policies. And I think, and I'm repeating myself here, that the Democratic Party invests in itself so much in the optics in order to get the votes of, kind of like a concentrated, solely body of voters, plays a losing game. Yeah, because that's not truth. That's not, the actual, representation. They're not focusing on what we want to get done and why. They're focusing on the figureheads, like you said, who's going to lead what department and, what gender and what color and what ethnicity. And, if Kamala, had one parent who emigrated from India, then we need someone from India. If the other parent was from Jamaica, I mean, what? That's like dynastic. That's the stuff we run away from. Like I came here because I didn't want to be like the daughter of and the niece of, right? Like exactly what I know. I wanted to get away from, and yet that's how we've begun to like understand people, solely by like family name and tribal or allyship, So it's a pity.
My daughter, who is in high school, just the other day had an assignment where she's supposed to take her local representative and then write out every committee that the person is on, right? And so and what that committee oversees. So she's writing. And what you realize is the way government actually works is pretty extraordinary in terms of the amount of work people have to put in, but it would bore your average listener to tears. Like we don't have an appetite to really know how these laws are made and what their decision making is going on, and no one seems willing to just say, okay, we're going to every once in a while bore you by telling you details, just so you know.
C-SPAN. I know. Where is C-SPAN?
I mean, it's like, so like Nydia Velasquez is the representative. What she's actually doing is extraordinary, but probably in the political positioning, it's just like daughter of an immigrant, it's just playing on this little talking point. And so when I used to work at George, that was one of the things that we were trying to do, was try and make politics something that like people had a more coherent idea of how things happen and like who these people are, so that we could get away from the power of a dumb soundbite. We've given, by lacking information and education, we have given every bit of power to 5 words that flash on your screen and has a picture, a misleading picture that goes along with it. And both sides are definitely guilty of it. I spend a lot of time seeing something, getting outraged over, researching it in 5 different places to figure out whether it was real or not. And, and that's for Democrats as well as Republicans, and frequently you're being manipulated.
So, and you're a professional, so imagine how difficult it is for people, like you, who want to research it, and they end up down rabbit holes.
Yeah, no, it's a very, actually what might be helpful is that Biden may bring back boring government, and if we could get into a little bit more of this like sense of it is actually, it's a tedious task. I mean,
he might, but he doesn't look like it right now. He's gone all in for the optics and the identities and I thought we would be Twitter free, but he's on Twitter or someone's writing for him. I don't know if it's him, but they've figured out how he's supposed to write, and it's just like so disappointing. I thought we would just have like 40 years of no presidential tweets. That itself would be an amazing break. But no.
I know. I mean, the problem is nobody wants to cede the territory, right? Like they don't want, if they just fall silent, then other people occupy the space. That's the problem,
Yeah, but I thought
now you have to.
he's not gonna run again. I don't know. Maybe he changed his mind about that. Maybe he wants to run when he's 90. I don't know. But I mean, I thought he wasn't gonna run again, so that frees him from that, consideration. My personal opinion is that 2 terms, but not consecutive. Can we start by changing that? Let these people think about what they've done for 4 years, like learn from it, because kind of understand what happened, and then they can run again after 4 years, or 8, and that gives them room to grow and as humans, and also learn from their mistakes, as we all do, and but also it gives them a break from this like continuous campaigning,
Yes. Well, the other thing is that it would allow a whole new crop of voters to analyze the same person, which is interesting because you get a whole 4 more years.
Right. Yeah.
Voters.
And also, I mean, I can say that since I've been a citizen, I have only voted the worst of 2 evils. I have never had the opportunity to actually, vote from the heart and be excited.
I know.
So it would be great to have that opportunity sometime before I die.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think it may be impossible, though, once you know them so well by the time they're actually, you're going to cast your vote. So it's almost impossible to know anyone in that much complexity and have, this intense enthusiasm for them. I mean,
but that's why we need technocrats.
Like, who's your biggest hero? Like in the world, not even in politics. Who's the living hero that you have right now?
Oh, I don't have one. I would have to think. I don't have one off the top of my head. Do you? I don't.
I don't know that I do. And I mean, I think that's interesting because it's basically like maybe that's just not the type of, maybe that's just not going to happen. Do you know what I mean? Like there will be never anyone you would vote for, because you know what it is? It has a combination. You know too much about them, and you also have to leave room for the fact that you don't know everything about them. So it's hard to endorse someone with that kind of deep, intense enthusiasm when you are both vouching for all of their frailties that you've heard of and all the unknowns that could crop up. So I think
but when I vote in Greece, because we do have that perk, I don't know if I should say this on the air, but I'm still voting in both countries, miraculously. Yeah. So, then because it's parliamentary, I have voted often, people about whom I'm tremendously excited, and people who have just started parties. Varoufakis, the guy who was our Minister of Finance and started the party, last time, I voted for him. So it's just, I have felt pretty enthusiastic, but that's because you have like a dozen candidates, so you have space to find something that is important to you. It doesn't mean that I idolize that candidate. It just means that one of his platforms is really important to me, So that's where I feel like most passionate, right, at that moment when the election is held. Whereas here I haven't felt that, I'm not looking to idolize someone or expect any in any way any perfection, but I have I feel that it would be nice to have more of a variety, more of a choice, not just yes and no, but actual choice, as we do in local elections. We have much more choice.
Yes, we do. And I mean, that's one very good thing that's come out of all of this, right, of the last 4 years, is that people are much more engaged in their local elections than they had been, and I think, is the way it was supposed to be structured. Like that person who was president you were interested, but it wasn't supposed to be the be all.
The executive power has been growing and growing unchecked. For sure.
Since you were supposed to be more like, you were really supposed to focus on your state,
your area,
and all that kind of thing. Exactly.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
demigods, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's always
Not
done
Zeus, but the
exactly.
demigods.
The demigods, yeah. I call it's the failed artists, you know. It's like, what if
Yes.
Hitler had been accepted, to the art
I
school in
know.
Paris? And what if, GW had gone to like art school and figured
I know.
out he loved
I know.
painting? What?
I know.
How many of us would have lived, survived? Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a book on George W., and it never occurred to me that he was going to devote himself entirely to art.
I know, he's getting better at it.
It's
This last
fascinating.
holiday card is
know.
actually pretty good.
I haven't seen that one yet, but I was like, no, it's really fascinating, truly, right? I mean, the number of paintings he's done, and he actually has he has his own.
Oh yeah, he has a style. Yeah, very much. Yeah,
Yeah.
and he has a theme, and he has been, maturing as an artist.
Yeah.
Which and I think he's much better at it than he was at at being president.
Yeah.
So once again, like we got caught up by the last name and the positioning and the relations. Yeah. So if we could focus on policy and not name recognition, then maybe we could have like technocrats who we vote for because we want that one thing that they stand for absolutely. And that would be so nice. But for that to happen, you need more than two. There is just, one. It needs to be a wider field. Otherwise, the stakes are too high, and we never, who votes for Ralph Nader anymore? Like, nobody. Are you kidding me? Those votes cast in Florida, where I voted, they are like, ignominious.
Yeah, no, it's true, and particularly the last two elections, people have been particularly focused on don't do anything to express any other point of view because it will cause the downfall of civilization.
Speaking of civilization, I just remember the Civil War's big sex fact. So syphilis was rampant in the war field. Lincoln had it, but more soldiers died from it and from dysentery and gangrene than soldiers died in battle, and they went uncounted. So there were like 10 times as many whorehouses as hospitals, as they used to call them then, and traveling prostitutes, sex workers, as young as 12, who followed the armies around the country. And so Lincoln wanted to stop the spread because, boys as young as 18, the first time they would have sex, they would catch syphilis. So he had the army hire nurses. The army actually trained nurses to give the soldiers hand jobs to stop them from going to prostitutes. So it was also the start of more widespread use of porn, which was also promoted in wartime as an aid to help men get themselves off safely. So this is the history we don't read much about. This was amazing. This is such a good and fulfilling and widespread conversation. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your time and your brilliance. And please keep writing and come back. And everybody out there, till I'm back with you next week, keep speaking sex. If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.